I would say probably where I was really committed was high school, but I kind of paid attention to it just growing up, and having lived as a military brat, you do get exposed to it. It was in high school because I had decent grades in high school. My dad talked to me about going to the academies. I was not that interested in the military, but then he encouraged me to do ROTC because he had taught ROTC after his second tour in Vietnam, and it was a way to get a scholarship to go to college. And so my intent was to basically do that and do 4 years as an engineer and move back to Texas was my plan. But it obviously I stayed much longer than that. It was when I was in college, actually. Knowing I was going to be an engineer, it was going to be, I was in a 5-year program because I was working a dual degree program in architecture and civil engineering. And so it was when I went to summer camp for ROTC. In that camp, I went into and got a chance to fly in a T-37, one of our trainer aircraft. And once I had a chance to do that, it was one of those where, God, that was so cool. I didn't do it earlier, partly because it was a commitment, longer service commitment associated with that. And as I came into college at 17, I'm not so sure I wanted to do for a 5-year program another 7 years to age 29. But once I did that, and it really hit me. And then I looked around at the others that had pilot slots, and I'm fairly competitive, and I go, well, if they're getting one of those, I think I can get one. And that's when it really piqued my interest into flying. You get away. You get away from email. You get away from you can compartmentalize a lot and be able to get out. And I think one of the things that I've always remembered is on a day when it's really cloudy and it's raining, and then you take off and you pop through the clouds and the sunshine. It's those kinds of things that that most people don't get a chance to see or get a chance to experience. And being at the controls of an airplane where you are almost one with the airplane, and in the F-16 that I flew most of my career, you sit up pretty high. It's almost like riding a magic carpet in some aspects, and you get so you and the airplane become one. And that to me is enjoyable, where you can actually take an airplane, and particularly a fighter like that, and have it do some things, and be able to be so in one with the aircraft, and then also just to see the beauty of nature from above that you don't get a chance to. Most folks don't get a chance to enjoy on a regular basis. I think in flying, just even in combat or just day to day, you need to walk in a little bit of apprehension. Because if you walk in with too much confidence, you're gonna do something that you're gonna either make a mistake or put yourself in a situation you probably shouldn't be in. And so I always flew with a bit of apprehension. The thing about combat is it's when you have a team of airmen and a joint team that come together and be able to execute a plan. It's the precision of the plan and how all that comes together. And I almost equate it to sports. I'm a huge NFL fan. And so just watching how a game plan can come together and be able to execute and know that you can count on different aspects, whether it's the tankers that are going to be there to give you gas, or it's going to be the command and control aircraft that's going to be there to kind of point out where the threats are, or it's your wingman that's flying with you, or the opportunity to lead a large package of a strike package of aircraft, be at the leading edge of a 20 ship package, and know that you've laid out a plan that everybody's doing their part. Those are the kinds of things that excite me of the aspect, and then you're making a difference. You're doing things in support of our national objectives, and that's another part of the beauty of watching people who are all dedicated to come together to make things happen. That is another part of this that I thoroughly enjoyed throughout my career. Well, because the apprehension here for whether it's in combat or just in training, the possibility of a situation that you put your life at risk, and flying airplanes is not risk free, and so that part of the there's the apprehension, but there's also the thrill of being able to do things that drive a little bit of risk, and you got to have a little bit of that in you to be able to execute and be able to fly like that. I've always felt that for every mission, I do say a little prayer before I go. In my G suit, I always flew with a copy of the New Testament in my left pocket. I still have that New Testament that I keep with me. It's those kinds of things that you really got to know that there's something could happen in any one of these. And I'll just tell you from my own experience, having ejected out of an F-16, there's things when things don't go like you plan, and you don't know when that day's going to come, and you just got to be prepared for it. I was stationed in Homestead Air Force Base in Miami, and we were coming back from middle of Florida, where we do where our bombing range is, and it was up at about 22,000 feet, and my aircraft got struck by lightning, caught on fire. And then I ejected over the Everglades. And so I spent about 15 minutes in the Everglades before I got picked up by a Coast Guard helicopter. Well, you don't really feel it, but you see it. And there's a big flash. And my wingman next to me said, you lost your centerline tank. I had a centerline gas tank that exploded. He said that a couple of times. Then he said, you're on fire. I already knew I was on fire because I had a firelight. And then he's over time, I flew for about another 5 minutes, and he says, "Okay, you have a lot of fire back there now." And so all your training kind of comes into play, and you go through this on a regular basis of all the steps you take if you're going to eject from the aircraft. And I would just tell you it was a pretty simple decision based on our checklist says if fire persists, eject. And it was a pretty simple decision, just one of those. Once I got in the parachute, then I go, okay, I hope there's nothing down there. Because I'm going into the Everglades, and as you might imagine, there's alligators and other things out there, and snakes, and I'm not a big alligator or snake fan. So but the training that we go in and day out as a military member allows us to make some of these things almost second nature. And so you worry about it, but you don't. And so it's kind of it's a unique and an odd kind of thing that you do worry, but you don't. And that's the way I felt throughout my Air Force career. I was in the third grade. So I think you noticed it, but you didn't in some aspects. But we did get treated differently in some cases. And, that part kind of stands out to me. And I can go, into high school, where the high school I went to was in Newport News, Virginia, and it was 50% African-American. But I didn't live in the same neighborhood that most of the African Americans lived in, because they were being bussed in, and we lived in a different neighborhood where there were only 2 African American families. And so it was one of these where I felt like I did kind of operate in 2 worlds, where we lived, and then the church we grew up in San Antonio was all African American. And so I learned to adapt throughout my life to do this, but it's just one of those. It was you stand out. I would say for many minorities, it's something we deal with all the time. And you learn how to adapt as you go back and forth. But the thing is, you're always being judged, and that's the part that I think sometimes you got to get used to. The fact that you're being judged, that because you're the only one in the room, whether it's African American, any other race or gender, if you're the only one in the room, that sometimes you may represent, that entire demographic to the majority that's in the room. You feel the extra pressure to perform because you may be the first and only that has the opportunity. And what you don't want to do is actually, damage the opportunity for someone else that comes behind you. Because you're really trying to do, in some cases, when you're in those rooms, you're the one that's going to break the barrier and open the door. And you want to bust the door open to make sure that there's others that have the opportunity to come after you. And you don't want to actually have that door shut because of some stereotypical assumption that's placed on you as an individual, or you're the demographic that you represent. I think part of it is faith and family. I'm a man of faith, and that I grew up in the church. It goes back to my grandparents, my parents, and then just the family. It's the pressure that, I won't call it pressure. I think about what my parents and the things they said, basically you can be anything you want to be, but they always challenged me. And it was always one of these things that they knew I had, whatever our potential was. Even when, your report card come home and you show something, they go, we know you can do better. Because you've proven in certain aspects that you can do this. And so I think they've always had confidence in me as well. I would say the same thing for me, my sister, and my brother, because of the comments they put into us and instilled in us, and then they put us in situations that challenge us, that helps you. You know, the more you get challenged and figure out you can get through this. This is how you progress. And I would say the same thing my wife does for our sons. It's probably when I was in high school and junior high school, as you start getting report cards with the grades on them, and how they really focused on grades and your work ethic, and then just watching the work ethic from my parents, and they became a role model for me. So it's those kinds of things where they push you, and then put you in situations and expose you to things. And one of the things that I did 7th through 9th grade in Germany. I'll never forget this, but my dad always said that you're going to get to see things that most kids only read about. And because of that, they did things to provide us experiences as we were growing up. And because of those experiences, it helped to broaden us, it helped to challenge us. And those are the things that I think really helped me to be broader as a person and as an individual. And, you also forgot the more you know, the more you forgot you don't know, because you start to pull strings in different areas. And I think that was helpful to me to push me in certain direction, and also them trying to expose me to certain things to help me develop myself as a young man. There's nothing that I, other than situations that I dealt with, and you go back to what I talked about earlier, and when my sister and I were the only African Americans in elementary school, where I got called the N-word, I remember it was in the 4th grade, because that's the first time I think it really it hit me a bit more than because at a young age, kids don't really have biases or racism. We all just want to hang out. It's just when you now get to a point as you get a little older, and I think those are instilled by adults. Based on what they teach their children. And that was probably the first time that it really hit me. And that was probably about 1972-ish time frame. It hurt. It bothered me. I also remember we were reading some of Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn, and the N-word's in there. And so it's, that also kind of, it's one of those that kind of stands out to you, and you're doing this in class. So it's kind of a awkward type piece that we wouldn't do today. We'd approach it much differently. And I think it was, in some cases, more accepted back then. To an extent, but partly because, as a fighter pilot, and then in my first assignment, I was the only African American in my squadron. In our wing, this is in Korea. There was only 2 of us. I was in one squadron. Mark Devane was in the other squadron. There was probably, of the pilots in the wing, there was probably about 60 to 70. And the same thing happened when I went to my next base, where we had more squadrons, and we had probably close to 80 to 90. There's only 2 of us. And so I'm in one squadron, and J.J. Johnson's in the other squadron. And so, again, it's one of those where you're representing your entire demographic, because you're the only one in the room. You're the only one in the squadron. And so there's added pressure there, because you want to do well, not just for yourself, but you also want to do well for others that may come behind you. I wish I had a good answer for you, but one area that I really believe and have thought through throughout my career, and I think it also applies to me, you only aspire to be what you see. And if you don't see an African-American pilot, then you're not inclined to go, I could do that. If you're not exposed to it, to have the opportunity, and the ride, my opportunity to go fly in a T-37 really changed the trajectory of my life and my career. If I had not had that opportunity, I don't know if I would have decided to become a pilot. Matter of fact, when I decided I wanted to do this, I was told I'd lose my scholarship. And I was told to sit on it for a semester, and I did. And I came back and go, I still want to do this. And so it's one of those areas where, for young people, if they're don't have the opportunity to see it, they can't be it. And you don't have, and this is why in some cases you find different demographics gravitate to different career fields based on what they've seen or what their parents did, because that's kind of the family business, or this is what their aunts and uncles and cousins or brothers and sisters have done. And so that's why in the Air Force, what we're trying to do today is actually expose more young people of different backgrounds to aviation by putting them in airplanes and letting them fly. Matter of fact, I had a young man, he's not so young anymore, but I was a colonel, and I met him when he was a first lieutenant, and now he's a lieutenant colonel. We met yesterday, and we were talking about an aviation program he did just this past weekend, where they took 200 young men and women of diverse backgrounds and got them in airplanes and got them airborne, just so they could be exposed to it and get the thrill of flying. And that's the way you do this, because once you have an opportunity, this may hook one of them to actually go. You may do it for 200, but if you can get 5 or 10, you may change their trajectory for their life. And those are the things that we have to do by being able to expose young people to aviation, not just for the Air Force, but just for the nation as well. I've met James already. He's he's in his 90s. He's a fireball, and quite impressive. Just talking to him about his experience, particularly in the gunnery competition back in 1949 that they won. They've been an inspiration to me, and I would say probably more so after I came into the Air Force. I was probably aware of the Tuskegee Airmen, but not as much as I am, or once I came into the Air Force. And more and more throughout my career, as I've been able to engage and meet original Tuskegee Airmen and be able to talk to them and listen to their stories, the more and more I listen to. I guess the older I get, the more inspired I get, because I've had a chance to engage with so many of them. But at the same time, knowing that so many of them were passing away. Matter of fact, I spoke at Charles McGee's memorial service here about 3 weeks ago. Another airman, he lived to be 102, and he's actually a record-breaking fighter pilot, because he's got more combat missions than almost any fighter pilot in the United States Air Force, over 400. So quite impressive, and flew during World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Well, I think they really helped pave the way to integrate the services. You got to think about the fact that initially African Americans weren't allowed to fly, but it almost became a requirement just because they needed more pilots. And then it shows to me that if given the opportunity, many people will actually have the skill set and desire to be able to do many things. They just weren't given the opportunity before. Or there's those that thought just for different reasons that they weren't capable. And they proved otherwise. And this is what led to the executive order that President Truman signed to integrate the services. I wasn't there, but I can just imagine that this had a key role. And as you read the history books, it had a key role in changing the face of our military. Doesn't mean we still didn't have discrimination of some sort within the military after we integrated, but it did open the door. And if that had not happened, I don't think I'd be sitting here today as the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. I would say they were patriotic in the fact they wanted to serve their nation. They had perseverance, and they knew it was going to be an uphill battle in certain cases. But they also wanted to prove that they given the opportunity, they could deliver. And that to me is an inspiration, because I think for anybody, if someone tells you no, you can't do something, that is a challenge. That's one of those where you sometimes, and for me personally, I always think about it, you step up to that challenge because you go, no, I can do this. And that's where the Tuskegee Airmen kind of proved that case, where folks, at the time said, no, they can't do this. And they proved them, completely wrong. And that's, to me, is an inspiration that, for any young person to go, you can look at examples like that where someone says, an institution says, no, you can't do this, and you prove otherwise. I mean, it's why I serve. It's what we believe about the values of our country, and good or bad. Every situation, there's going to be some good and some bad. but I think there's more good than bad. And when I look at the United States and those that serve, we do this for a reason, because we enjoy serving. We have a higher calling to be able to serve our nation. And there may be some things we don't disagree with, or maybe weren't treated as fairly as we thought in some cases. But you got to look at it from a very broad perspective. And if you throw in the towel because you come up against a challenge, then it's not worth fighting for. And so that's why I really believe in some cases you've got to get through some of these challenges to prove some things wrong, and be able to make the case, and be, in some cases, you got to be a little vocal about some of these. And it may not happen right away. You actually sometimes have to be very consistent, persistent to actually drive change. And that's something I've carried with me throughout my Air Force career is, I don't stop at the first no. I talk about the 5 stages of grief. I talk about the 5 stages of no. Hell no. Yeah. Hell no. No. We'll think about it. Not a bad idea. We should be doing it already. You got to get through all 5 stages. If it's something you really believe in, you got to get through all 5 stages. If you stop at the first hell no, then it'll never happen. It'll never happen. You've got to continue to push forward, particularly if it's something in your heart of hearts you really believe in. Actually, I spend a lot of time thinking and reading. I'm an introvert, so I just take in information, and I like to take very complex problems and then simplify them in things that resonate with me, and then be able to share those. And that's, I'm not sure how. Several years ago, I came up with this, and it's just I've been in positions of leadership when you go, hey, we're going to go do something, and then someone tells you no. I go, okay, that doesn't make any sense to me. And so what I found is if I have very consistent and persistent in my message, and it may not be ready for prime time, you got to look at the environment when you approach some of these things, and then you got to come back and maybe reassess how you can continue to approach and bring that idea forward. And that to me has been one of the areas, just because I've always challenged things. Like, it's easy to say no, it's hard to say yes. If you say yes, that means you may have to do something in your site. And I say that people are inherently lazy. Okay, you don't necessarily want to do a lot of work unnecessarily. And so it's easy to say no. If you say no, then you don't have to do anything. If you say yes, then it may require some work on your part. And that's why some people say no. And that's why, you got to kind of work with them to be able to get through all 5 stages. I've had several. I think probably initial challenges were my initial F-16 training, as well as when I got to my first assignment, because I somewhat struggled in my initial F-16 training. I'd done well in pilot training, but initial F-16 training, I struggled a little bit. And then I went to my first operational assignment. And then when you get there, you do some training, then you do your initial check ride to be a mission-ready F-16 pilot. As it got more complex, I probably just struggled in certain areas. And then when you do your check ride, there's certain criteria of that you have to do. And one of those is it's a bombing mission, and you have to actually have your bomb land in a certain criteria. Well, mine fell well outside the criteria, and I failed the check ride. And so the impression you make, as I like to say, you never get a second chance at a first impression. So the impression you make as a brand new pilot and the only African American in the squadron, and you fail your check ride, that didn't go so well. But it was a motivator for me. It's faith, it's attitude. I think the aspect of, when you have a failure, it's not so much that you fail, it's what you do after you failed. And it's the attitude you have. And there's a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. that I've somewhat adapted to make it gender neutral, but it's he says, the measure of a man, I say the measure of a leader is not where they stand in comfort and convenience, but where one stands in challenge and controversy. And so when you have challenge and controversy, or you have a failure, how do you respond? That to me is a sign of a leader. That's a test of your leadership. That's a test of your fortitude as an individual. And I think those are so important that, you almost need to have a little failure in your life to actually make you stronger. And I've operated with those that I've trained, and they get to a certain level. They've never failed any not a single ride throughout their training, and then they come when I was an instructor at the weapons school. Then they fail there, and it's devastating for them. And you can see those that have actually failed and struggled. They tend to do better in the long run than those that have actually been able to ride it, without any hiccups throughout. And so there is some value when you have these setbacks or failures or I call them all shucks moments where things don't quite work out right, because it makes you stronger, it builds character, and from there you become a better leader and a better person. Part of this is I've watched, you watch over the years, and even watched a little bit of today of what happens to African Americans in certain situations. So it's frustrating to watch. And I know when it happened, my wife and I watched the news, and we were very frustrated by seeing what had transpired. So I'd had my confirmation hearing, but I had not been confirmed yet. So I was waiting to be confirmed as the next Chief of Staff of the Air Force. So I was kind of torn on what to do. And it was on Facebook, someone asked, "Hey, what is General Brown going to say?" And someone from my staff chimed in and said, "He's waiting to be confirmed, so he's not going to say anything right now." So that was playing in my mind. The other part was our youngest son went to Washington University in St. Louis, and his freshman year was what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, which is about 2 miles from his campus. And so we're in Hawaii, and he calls us on a Sunday, and he was struggling. And so in the conversation, he asked, "Hey, Dad, what is PACAF, Pacific Air Force, is going to say?" And as a commander of Pacific Air Force, he was asking me, "Dad, what are you going to say?" And so I kind of took that in. That was on a Sunday. And Monday I came to work, and they told me, the staff was saying they're working back in D.C. Go, "Hey, you're going to get confirmed on Tuesday." And so Tuesday came and went, and I didn't get confirmed. And I said, "Okay, I'm just going to do this." So I wrote out a script of what I wanted to say, because there's a lot of things kind of going through my mind of what I wanted to say, how I wanted to say it, and then we taped it on Thursday. And my intent was really to do it just for, kind of directed at the Airmen of Pacific Air Forces. Had no intent for it to go as broad as it did, but I'm glad it did. And I think I'm still surprised by it in some cases, because I go in different audiences where people I've never met or don't come across, and they come back and talk to me about the video. And it's interesting for me personally. I'm just, I look at myself as just CQ Brown. But I also know that I'm in a position that has a voice to be able to say some things that maybe some others may or may not be able to say. And so I think I have a level of responsibility by being put in this position to be able to do that. And
what did your son say?
He appreciated it. It's interesting. He tried to be, because they showed the video at work, at his work, and people didn't know that he was my son. For our boys, we want them to be who they are without having to, be the chief of the staff of the Air Force's son. They want to be their own individuals, and so that to me and to them is important. And so from that aspect, he tried to stay low key, but folks started to put it together because they knew that I was in the military, that I was in Hawaii, and so a small group of his friends knew was we were tied together as family. I see that there's opportunity. I see that we're also making progress, but I also see that it's going to take some time. I don't know that this is the thing about when folks are looking for change, they want things in a certain time frame. And if you're doing what in some cases might be a shift in culture is not something you can do very quickly. And it doesn't not just how you prepare those of the different diverse backgrounds, but it's also preparing those of the majority to be accepting, because they actually have more influence and more impact on this than maybe those from the diverse background of how we move forward. So it will take time. The key part I believe on this is that we cannot take some of these programs that we're trying to do today and stop them before we actually know what the results are going to be, and understand that sometimes, particularly if you're engaging with young people in middle school and high school, you may not know the results of that work until 5 to 10 years later, when they come back and you do a survey and go, "Okay, how did you get interested in the Air Force and become a pilot in the Air Force?" Well, there was a program I did when I was 14, And now I'm 24 and just finishing pilot training. Those are the things that we have to have the patience on to be able to understand how we're going to make progress. But for those that serve today, I think the key part here is to be able to listen and be able to take and hear from our airmen at the same time. What I talk about is making changes that are meaningful, that mean something to our young people or those that serve. It's got to be sustainable, which means we got to put in some cases, some resources and funding behind it, and it's got to be enduring and things that are going to be around long after I'm gone. And those are the things that I believe the Air Force has to do. That's one of the things I want to lay a foundation for during my tenure as the Chief of Staff. It is. And I think it's also a place where you can actually bring in individuals with diverse backgrounds, whether they're an immigrant with a strong German accent, or someone who grew up in the inner city, someone who grew up on a farm, someone whose parents immigrated to the country and they're the first generation American. You know, what I talk about sometimes when our young people from across the nation come to, whether it be basic training or they go through ROTC or come to the Air Force Academy, that may be the most diverse environment they've ever lived in their life. Because they grew up in a part of the country where you didn't have, different individuals with diverse backgrounds that you interacted with on a day-to-day basis. And then the military provides opportunities for everybody, to the best of our ability, equal opportunities to be able to rise to the merit of your talent. And I think we help pave the way for the rest of the nation in many ways. And you can go back again to 1948 when we integrated the services. That probably, that was before the Civil Rights Movement. And think about that the aspect it kind of helped to lead the way in certain areas to move things forward. Well, I think, part of it is, one, it's a large institution, but also, two, as you lay in policy, kind of from a military standpoint, it's easier to get levels of alignment because you kind of can direct things, but you can't, the thing I talk about is it's the last time I saw someone actually give a direct order to go do something, it was like in a World War II movie. It doesn't happen that way in the military. We still have to, you're still working with people and you got to have them buy in to be able to do the things we need to do, whether it's going to combat or whether it's actually bringing in diversity programs. So it takes work. You got to bring, and this takes leadership, and leadership actually has to be engaged and involved in communicating with our service members to have them see, and not everybody agrees all the time. And there's value in that when you have disagreement, because the friction, iron sharpens iron. And sometimes that friction helps us to better understand how we might approach various problems and how we move forward. But the most important part is hearing from our young airmen. For me personally, hearing from our young airmen and hearing their perspective, because as you might imagine, there's a lot of layers between me and them. I like to surround myself with people that don't necessarily always agree with me. Because I like to say, if it sounds too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. I'd like to have people who will come in and tell me things that maybe I don't want to hear. And because they do that, they hope to open my eyes a bit more so I don't have a blind spot. I may not change my decision, but I go in with my eyes a little wider open about what the risk might be, partly because I'm hearing their perspective. And sometimes they just want to be heard too, that I take it under consideration. And so, one of the techniques I use even today is when I find that there's disagreement within the staff versus, talking to one side and the other side, I get them all in the same room and go, let's all talk. Because I often find that we're not talking to each other, we're talking past each other. I think the biggest weight sometimes is sometimes making the wrong decision. But I also think, not making a decision is a decision upon itself. And so knowing I'm going to have to do some things and not make perfect decisions, but also understanding that when I make those decisions, I'm not going to make everybody happy, which I'm okay with. Knowing that I'm going to have to be able to move forward and drive change. As you drive change, it's going to be uncomfortable. And so that to me, sometimes is where I get maybe nervous. But you've got to be willing to take some risks to be able to move forward. I think the hardest part for me sometimes is actually getting the information I need to help me make decisions or to provide guidance and intent. And that's the challenge about being a senior leader, is no one wants to bring you bad news. And because of that, you don't get some of the unfiltered things you need to hear to be able to drive and make things better. An example I would give you sometimes is that what I'll get as parts of the staff, they'll tell me things. They'll go, "Hey, we want you to know about this, but we don't need your help yet." And I go, "So why did you tell me?" Because I could be able to make a phone call or lay out some other guidance to break down a barrier to get us to be able to move faster and not have parts of the staff going back and forth. And so I think one of the things I always want to make sure is I'm communicating and providing intent at the same time I'm getting feedback. And it's hard to get feedback at the senior level. And one of the things I do when I go travel and visit bases, I usually have a breakfast or lunch with junior airmen without any of the leadership in the room, just me and them. And then I talk to them, and I tell them some stories about me, when I fail my check ride and some other things to show that I'm a real person just like them, I'm just older. And then have them open up to me about some of the things they think about. And I try to, ask some questions to draw information out of them about their experiences in the United States Air Force, about their leadership, about what they really appreciate about being in the Air Force, or what things they don't like about being in the Air Force. And then we have a conversation about, the things I can do and the things I can't do and how we can work together. And I really believe that collaboration is the key to making things happen. Not so much. Here's the thing I really think about. The vast majority of our service members are doing the right thing. And what we have is, what I'm really trying to do as a Chief of Staff of the Air Force is create an environment where all of our airmen can reach their full potential with no distractors or no detractors, whether it's extremism, sexual assault, harassment, discrimination. All these things are factors that prevent us from reaching our full potential. And so we do have to think about it. Do I worry about it? No, because I know there's about 95, well over 95% that are actually all get it. What you find is there's a small percentage that can actually be the bad apple in the bunch. And we want to make sure that we understand that they understand that those are not our core values. And we want all of our airmen to live up to our core values of, integrity, service, and excellence. People make choices. Okay, and what I try to do is, as the Air Force Chief of Staff, what we try to do as leaders across the Air Force is instill in our airmen the core values of integrity, service, and excellence. And some people gravitate better than others. It's all part of leadership and how you mentor and develop young people as they become part of the Air Force. But I know there's going to be challenges that some don't always agree or doesn't resonate with them. But part of this is maybe in some cases for us understanding a little bit more about their background. This is where when I think about leadership today, you got to be a little bit more in tune as a leader to be able to understand that the life experiences of those that are coming into the military, and you got to meet them where they are in some cases, and then kind of bring them along. Just because you come into the Air Force and go through basic training or go through ROTC doesn't mean all of a sudden the core values are completely ingrained in you with the flip of a switch. And it does take some work. I think it is. I mean, you look at what we are able to do as a nation, not just with the military, but you look at all aspects of our nation and how the military plays a key role in this. And I'll just tell you from my own personal experience, having spent a good amount of time as a general officer, either living overseas or in jobs where I was focused on overseas locations, and the relationships we build as military members that stand the test of time. Stand the friction points that may happen between nations diplomatically, but where the military is able to come together and be able to do things. And so there's some investment there, but it does pay dividends to, not only for our national objectives, but the objectives of our allies and partners, but from a broader sense, what we try to do collectively for global security. Well, I think people will still be involved. I mean, we still have to have a human that's in the loop of the decision-making process. But what I can see is the aspect that the mix of airplanes that actually have pilots in them versus those that are either autonomous or work collaboratively with some of the manned platforms. I could see that ratio shift. Even for the ones that we use today that are remotely piloted, it still takes quite a bit of a number of people to actually operate those. They are behind the scenes. You put less people at risk when you do this. But I think the thing we also got to think about when you put less people at risk, how that drives decision-making across nations of when you might go to conflict. And we collectively got to think about that and what that does to global security. When you're committing a bunch of young people to a conflict, that does wear on you. I mean, I'll just tell you, it weighs on me when we think about this, that we put our young people and our servicemen in harm's way. Those decisions aren't made lightly. When you start looking at either drones or unmanned platforms without humans in it, you don't have the human cost there. That could change the dynamic, and that's something we collectively have got to think about. If you start to make that push there, then it go, well, there's less risk, so it doesn't cost as much. That to me is something I think we will have to wrestle with going forward. The use of information. I would say that today, but it's going to grow. Information and data. I've talked about this here recently, that when I was in college, data science wasn't a thing. You have people now who have PhDs in data science. And how do you take all this information and data that we have out there that it's at our fingertips, and how are we able to use that to either make decisions, use it to drive perceptions, use it to change the course of where things may play out. And so the information and how we play in the information space will probably drive just as much as what we do with a piece of military hardware, and how you balance that. And I can see how the information and like behavioral sciences to actually understand the cognitive space, how important that's going to be in the future. And I also think about the aspect of what career fields do I have in the Air Force today that I may not need in the future versus the career fields that we don't really have in today that we're going to need in the future. I really think about how we make decisions, or how individuals make decisions. You make it based on the information you have and the validity of that information, or your perceived validity of that information. And as you're able to get more and more information, and how that information is presented to you, can it either lead you down a positive path, or can lead you based on misinformation down a wrong path to respond a different way. And so that's one aspect of it. It's also how you lay out information to make a case for something. And there's aspects of, there's high-end intelligence, but there's also things you can find out just on open source in the press. And I will tell you, I probably spend as much time reading classified information as I read unclassified information or news articles, because it helps my perspective as I start to make decisions. What other people know, what other people think, how they might respond to what you're doing. Because we can do a military action, but you need to understand what the reaction is going to be from the other side. And I often say you don't want to do something and be surprised by the actions you just did, because you may have been the catalyst for why an adversary responded a certain way, or an allied partner decides to maybe be supportive or not supportive with a particular approach. I was at my dining room table at Hickam Air Force Base there in Hawaii. It was about 9 o'clock in the morning. And so my wife and I were sitting next to each other, watching it on our laptop, watching it live. And it was interesting because about half an hour later, the vice president called me, because he was there to kind of go officiate the process. It was surreal. I mean, because you never imagine yourself being here or doing this. I still sometimes pinch myself that I'm doing this, because I'm just me being me. I'm just trying to do the best I can. And I think that what it really hit me was, there's two times when it really hit me that this is for real. after after we did that part and watched it at home, I got dressed and went into work. And my office had a big celebration with a cake and everything else. And so that was pretty moving. And it was a day of the ceremony. And that was, you march in, you sit down in your chair, and then the honor guard marches in. And you're going, this is for real. I mean, that's when it really hit me. And so you have moments where you kind of go through this and you kind of go, all right, this is for real. And it's not a dream. It's probably my boys, because they actually, make a bet sometimes when I'm doing change of command speeches or other things that, is Dad going to, is his voice going to start cracking? I don't know. I'm just very passionate about what I do. I tell folks, I may be a fighter pilot, I can be a softy at heart too. But I am very passionate about what I've been called to do. I very much appreciate the opportunities I've been given. And I guess it shows that I don't take these opportunities lightly at all. I do. So alarm goes off about 4:45. I'm out of the bed probably by 5. I check a little email to see if what's happened overnight, and then I work out. So I work out probably 5-6 days a week at home. COVID helped me get a home gym. Because I used to go to the gym, and over time with COVID, we built a home gym, so I basically have just about everything I need in the house. And even when I travel, I'll still go work out. And then I leave the house about 7. And the first meeting at 7:30, and it's a series of meetings throughout the day. And then I'm usually done by about 5:36 and get home. And then. Usually my wife and I watch the evening news, eating dinner, and then I do homework. I get a couple bags of homework each night that I bring home, and it's usually preparation for the next day or for the next several days. I usually go to bed about 11-ish, 11:30. So I get 5 or 6 hours, and then I'll sleep a little more on the weekends. But even if I try to sleep later, my body clock, I wake up after 5 or 6 hours. I read a devotional every day. So after I get dressed, I have a devotional I read. And it's part of my ritual before I walk out the door. I was completely surprised because I had no idea. My name wasn't even in for it. It was my public affairs officer who came busting into my office. He go, "Hey, you just made name one of the 100 most influential people in the world." And I go, "Really?" Again, for me personally, it was just I'm just me being me, and I'm very humble, I think, in some aspects. And so it wasn't something that I aspired to be. I never aspired to be the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. As I've said, I'm probably not the first to be qualified, but the first to have the opportunity. And I want to make sure I open the door for many more that can to have this opportunity. I've watched others get the red jacket. I've watched throughout my career and met with the Tuskegee Airmen and knows how much it means there. And I'll go back to a quick story on, I met Charles McGee for the first time at a church service at the National Cathedral as a celebration for the United States Air Force. And when I met him initially, I walked up to him and saw him in his red jacket. I was completely speechless. And I was a 4-star at the time, and 4 stars aren't typically speechless. And then about 3 weeks after I came in as a Chief of Staff of the Air Force, we were filming a video to commemorate the end of the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II. We did it on the National Mall in front of the Lincoln Memorial. And when I showed up there, he was so honored to meet me, and I was so honored to meet him. And we just kept going back and forth. And then after we did that video, we had a chance to go up into the Lincoln Memorial, and just he and I, and spend time talking.
What did you talk about?
A little bit about his experience, about me thanking him for what he did to provide me the opportunity, and he being excited for the fact that I'm have this opportunity to serve as the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and to be the first African American to lead any branch of our military services. So it was just, fairly candid, but it's something I'll never forget. I'm not afraid to speak up, but I pick a way to do it because I want to make sure you only have one shot at it. You want to make sure you get it right. And so it's important for me, and that's why I spend a lot of time thinking about how I approach things. And sometimes I probably think about it too much, but I think as I've gotten more senior, I'm a little bit more vocal than I have been in the past, and I think that's important because I'm able to say some things others are going, God, I wish someone would say something, and I've come to the point where I go, okay, maybe it needs to be me, particularly in the position I sit in today.